What's up guys, my name is Josh, and today we're going to be talking about the MrSpeakers Aeon Flow open backs. I have not heard the closed back, so any comparisons, don't leave that up to me. Maybe ask in the comments, maybe somebody can answer that. But this is a kind of interesting headphone. It's a very well built headphone. It's a very unique design. It's kind of one of those love it or hate it. I personally love it. It's a very comfortable design, and it's a decently easy to drive planar magnetic headphone. And my real quick rundown of this is that the headphone that they've created, it seems like they played it safe. This doesn't have any huge flaws or anything unexpected, and what that ends up feeling like to me and kind of sounding like is actually a little bit boring. This is not a very impressive headphone for my taste. It may be for yours. I'm going to try and lay out the sound as best as I can, and you can decide if that's something that you're into. And if you are, that's awesome. That's perfect. That's amazing. But this isn't really a headphone for me. Now, before we get into the sound portion, let's go ahead and jump into the build quality, which is something that I am actually very impressed with. So you have this ear-shaped design that, as you can see, is actually pretty big. Like, you can see the disparity in size between my ear and the actual cup. And it's got a lot of room to move around. Pretty much anybody's ears would fit in this. I do like the actual shape of the ear cups, mostly because I like things that do things differently. And this is a very unique design. It's got right and left 4-pin connectors on the bottom, and they have these 2 steel bands that are a decent amount of clamp force actually, but maintain a little bit of movability without feeling too stiff or too loose. The headband is leather and very comfortable and does actually move up and down along these metal bars, which is something that I actually really like. I like this mechanism a lot. It's very simple, but it feels solid and it works well. Now for the pads, these are some of the best stock pads that I've ever seen on a headphone. They're plush, but not too plush. They have a really good comfort to them. They seem to distribute pressure very evenly and around your entire ear, not just in a few particular places. The headband does the same thing for my particular head. It distributes weight like amazingly and very evenly across the entire top of your head. Now onto the cable, which actually sticks out of the bottom at a slight forward angle. I really like this design. And the reason why is because when it's on your head, if you tilt your head forward or you tilt your head left or right, if you're leaning over to pick something up, whatever it may be, you're not going to jam this cable into your shoulder and kind of screw with the mechanism. However, there is a slight concern for me. I cannot verify that this is an issue, but it's something that I want to draw attention to. When you're placing this flat on a desk with the cable, because of how far those cables stick out, you're not resting it directly on the headphone entirely. You are resting a little bit of the pressure on the cable. Now, over time, I imagine this could be an issue, but nobody's expressed any complaints in anything that I've read or heard. And it's probably not that big of a deal, but it's something worth mentioning. So maybe put these at the edge of the desk. In terms of fit and comfort, this is a flawless headphone. I have no complaints. And from what I hear from a lot of other people, they find them comfortable as well. Back to the cable for a second. This is probably about a 6.5 foot cable braided. Like I said, it's got 4-pin right and left connector. Now, if you buy these from the MrSpeakers website, you can actually order this screw-on connector, or you can get a balanced cable instead. As you can see, this cable does seem to hold a few kinks, and it's not a perfectly straight cable, and honestly I don't really recommend upgrading at all. It seems to be very solidly built, and it's a nice cable. I thought it was a nice touch. I like the cable on this. All right, 2 more things regarding build. One thing is that it does actually come with a carrying case that seems to be somewhat compact, pretty hard. I still wouldn't want to drop it, but if I did, I feel like it would be okay. It'd be definitely okay, like rummaging around in a suitcase or a backpack. All right, and then the last thing about the build, and something that will lead us kind of into sound, is that they actually come with little inserts that go in the actual ear cup. They kind of look like 2 little lungs. 2 pairs of these white felt, which I think have slightly different densities, and a pair of not very dense foam. Now, before I talk about those and which ones I'm using, which ones I prefer and why, I do want to talk about the power requirements for these. So now these have an impedance of 13 ohms and a sensitivity level of 94 decibels. The closed back version has a sensitivity of 92 decibels. All right, now let's go ahead and jump into sound, and I'll tell you which ones I'm using and why. And first I want to kind of go over what they do. From stock formation with no foam inserted in there, these cool down the highs a little bit, but they don't really increase a whole lot of bass. The other ones tend to muddy things a little bit more. They have a little less mid-range, a little bit less highs, but they do tend to increase bass. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of each for time purposes. For this review and my personal taste, I actually preferred this headphone without any foam in it. It felt the most raw, the most unbridled, and it just sounded cleaner without these in it. I want to talk about this headphone as a whole for a sec. Now, like I said before, this isn't my preferred sound signature. I'm trying to think of words to kind of describe how this sounds, because this is a safe sound. It sounds good. It sounds expensive. It sounds nice. It's a high quality sound. It's just a little bit boring. There's nothing exciting about it. The highs don't really have the sparkle of a headphone that has great highs. The lows don't really go that deep down. The mid-range has good performance, but it's not stellar. This is an $800 headphone. Yes, it's a cheap MrSpeakers headphone, but overall it is an expensive headphone, so I have to be very critical of it. And honestly, at this price point, I expect things to start doing things better than all the competition around. And if they don't, then it's very hard for me to recommend. So I guess I don't have really a solid conclusion to my general thoughts on this headphone. So let's go ahead and jump into the specifics, and maybe the way I explain it will help you make a decision on whether you might be interested in this. This is a very detailed headphone. Overall, bass is detailed, treble is detailed, and the mid-range and vocals are very detailed. And it does it in a way unlike the DT1990, which is a similarly priced headphone. That kind of jams detail down your ear. It kind of like forces it like into your ear, pounds it there. This kind of just leaves it available for you to capture if you want it, but doesn't force you to listen to it. Now that does equal a little bit of a feeling of loss of detail, but not very much. It still comes across very detailed, but very laid back in the delivery. I actually like parts of the treble representation on this headphone. This headphone is smoother than the 1990 in terms of treble delivery. So overall, I would describe the treble regions as pleasant. However, my complaint with the treble is that it really lacks sparkle. It kind of lacks an alive feeling to the treble and does feel a little bit dead. Still detailed, but a little bit dead in terms of delivery. Now let's talk about the mid-range. Now the lower mid-range is great. It's solid, it's punchy, it's detailed. The upper mid-range is just as detailed, but it lacks punch and feels a little bit uninspired, to be honest. There really isn't much there. And this is really where you start to see that dip in the mid-range, where it just keeps going down and down and down and doesn't really have any peaks or anything to bring it back up. Now mid-range vocals are a different story. Both males and females have a strikingly good presentation on this headphone. They're intimate, they have a lot of impact. I have my suspicions as to why parts of the mid-range can seem great and other parts not so great. Vocals are a great part of this headphone. They are very soft, yet detailed, have angelic highs for the girls, and solid deep and rumbly delivery for the males. However, the vocals don't seem very well isolated from the instruments in terms of soundstage, and I'll talk about soundstage a little bit more and kind of explain what I mean there. But for now, let's cover the last category before that, which is bass. All right, so the bass for this headphone is neutral and balanced, but a little bit boring. And it does start to roll off pretty hard in terms of what I actually hear, not necessarily what's on a graph. It does seem to roll off pretty hard at 100 hertz and below. I was listening to Yoshi Hirokawa's Interlude, and in that song there's kind of this repetitive beat in the background. It's very, very low, and it really hits pretty strong anywhere between 30 hertz and 70 hertz, and it just goes boom, boom, boom. And even on open back headphones, I've had some really, really solid performance with that kind of repetitive just boom, boom, boom. And that's one of my standardized songs for testing. Now in that song, the way they deliver it throughout the entirety of the song is that it starts getting progressively louder, progressively more intense and more obvious. And with this headphone, it just wasn't really getting much better. And I kept feeling like, okay, I haven't got to the part of the song where like it's really gonna start kicking in a little bit, and it just never got there for me. So the sub-bass regions for this headphone are a little bit disappointing. What makes up the majority of bass, it doesn't really have a lot of impact in terms of like a pressure adjustment or anything like that in your ear. But when you talk about the tonality of it or the detail of it, it's very, very good. But the sub-bass regions did leave a little bit to be desired. Now imaging and soundstage. Now I'm gonna cover soundstage first. The way this does soundstage and vocal isolation is a little bit strange. It seems to do soundstage kind of weird. I don't know, wrong. I don't know really how to explain it. But it seems like soundstage on this headphone is just represented as a lower volume. And I can't really explain the nuances of what I mean other than just saying that like a vocalist can seem here, and then there's like this tapping that's way over here or something like that. And on a normal headphone, I'm thinking, okay, intimate vocals here, tapping way over there. That makes sense. On this headphone, I'm not really hearing that. Things can seem wide, but in general, they just seem kind of soft and not very far away. And it's not the same way that I would say that it has tight soundstage. It doesn't always have tight soundstage. It has tight soundstage in certain areas, and then a very wide soundstage in others. But instead of there being like a tapping way over there, it just kind of feels like there's vocals and then there's kind of just soft tapping right here. and it doesn't seem far out, even though I know it should sound far out. But then a different song that has different frequencies and has the tapping or a different instrument way in the background, it does just fine. So the Soundstage is kind of elusive. Some songs it really works, other songs it doesn't. Now I will say that when the Soundstage is represented well, it does feel very, very natural. Now regarding that imaging is very tight with this headphone. Vocals seem very centered and very forward, and they have really, really good delivery. Honestly, I like the vocals on this headphone a lot. It's one of my favorites. Personally, I feel like the 660s beat it out a little bit, but this does offer things that the 660s does not. Now I plan on making a let's talk about what I'm about to say, and it's something that I've kind of avoided really talking about because I don't really quite know how to explain it the way that I want to explain it, but I'm gonna try. So a lot of times what separates good headphones from bad headphones outside of a frequency response or some generic measurement of bass, treble, mid-range, all that stuff, is something called timbre, and it's actually pronounced timbre even though it's spelled T-I-M-B-R-E. And a real quick rundown is what timbre is the difference in tonality and sound color between instruments and vocals, and that's why a banjo and a guitar are distinctive even if they play the same notes. They have kind of this color to it, this tone to it. And this is actually a big separation between a headphone like the Philips SHP 9500s and the HD 600 or 650. The 9500s, in my experience, yes, they do have relatively similar deliveries in terms of frequency response. They both have great mid-range performance, but what really separates those headphones is the timbre or the tone or the sound color. So this headphone has very, very good timbre. And what this kind of amounts to is a high quality sound. The sound sounds rich without being overemphasized or without requiring a lot of bass. And they seem to go with a very natural and very safe approach to the timbre on this head. And timbre is something that I've explored a lot personally. I've been really focusing on it for like the past 6 months, but didn't feel comfortable bringing it to a review, and I'll be kind of bringing it up with certain headphones here and there. Maybe not in every review, but I thought it was worth mentioning on this headphone because I felt like this headphone had very good sound color. All right, so final thoughts or my conclusion to this headphone. This is a safe and a high quality sound, but it is not for me. It has exceedingly good build quality. It is, like I said, a high quality sound. It sounds good, but it is boring. It doesn't do any one or few things very, very good, and it doesn't really have a delivery or a style to it that is either unique or stands out from the crowd in any particular way. Now, by me not recommending this, it's strictly based off of my own perception of what I want. If that sounds like something you're into, that's fine, and I highly recommend this if you're into something that has that kind of characteristic to it. That's just not what I look for. So starting with some of the reviews, I want to kind of start to change the structure of my conclusions. I want to lay out things that I like about a headphone and things that I don't like or wish could be adjusted, altered, or changed in some capacity for the better. 3 things that I like about this headphone are the build quality, the timbre, the sound color, and the vocals. The vocals are excellently delivered and very, very enjoyable. And then 3 things that I wish I could change on this headphone are going to be the bass response. I feel like it lacks a little bit, and I would have liked to see a little bit more grunt to it. The openness of this headphone, the airiness, and I don't mean airiness in a thin sound way, I mean airiness in like a breathable way. And I just wish it could sound a little bit more free. And then the very last thing is I would have liked to see a little bit more sparkle on the high end and a little bit more, just a little bit extra. Now my overall score for this headphone is going to be an 8 out of 10. It is not my preferred sound signature, but I can definitely appreciate those who do want something like this. There's not anything bad about those types of headphones. This one just isn't for me. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are if you have heard this headphone, if you prefer the closeback, if you've heard that one as well, what you think about this headphones, what you think about my review. If you do support what I do on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I also have a link to Instagram. And before I go, guys, I do want to give you a disclaimer for this headphone. I did receive this from a patron for a review. He is selling this headphone. I'm not keeping it. I'm not being paid or otherwise asked or influenced to say anything in particular about this headphone. All thoughts on my own. Subscribe if you're not. I do new videos every single day, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow. Peace.